Our first slide has our title with the IDJ and ICADV logos. Welcome to Indiana Disabilities Justice's presentation of Defined and Shared, the Voices of Systemic Ableism. Sponsored by Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I am your host Jennifer Milhar-Sick. This slide has 5 icons: recording, mic, closed captioning.
Hey, there we go.
This slide has 5 icons: recording, mic, closed captioning, tech support and questions. We are recording, and the webinar will be posted on our hub shortly. You will also be receiving the slides shortly after the webinar. Please remember to mute your mic. Voice to Print is providing closed captioning available under the closed captioning icon in your Zoom window. You can put tech support and questions in the chat. Finally, I am using a text-to-speech program to communicate. I may also speak if I have an impromptu thought. This slide has our basic disclaimer that says This slide has our basic disclaimer that says the information, views, and opinions expressed in this webinar are not necessarily those of our funders. Our next slide has pictures of Sierra Olivia Thomas Williams and myself. I am wearing blue jeans and a red plaid fleece and am hugging my dog. The top half of my brownish blonde hair is pulled back. Sierra is standing wearing a pink sleeveless top, with her hair cascading over her shoulders. From my DJ, we have Sierra Olivia Thomas Williams and myself. Sierra Olivia Thomas Williams, MA, is a prevention specialist at Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence and co-founder of IDJ. She will be helping with chat and technical assistance. Jennifer Milhar-Sick is part of the leadership as well as the webinar coordinator. I was born with cerebral palsy. Voice to Print is our captioner. Check them out at Voice to Print. Indiana Disability Justice is a sexual violence Indiana Disability Justice is a sexual violence prevention program of Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. We use a 4-step public health approach to sexual violence prevention. Identify the problem, address factors that increase and decrease violence, evaluate the process and outcomes, and share the results. Eliminating ableism gets at the root problem: power imbalances and power over marginalized communities and people. People with disabilities are far more likely to experience sexual violence than their peers without disabilities. This is in part because of the social isolation caused by systemic ableism. So it is important for us to understand ableism and systemic ableism and increase social and environmental inclusion as a step toward eliminating sexual violence against people with disabilities. One way IDJ can see the impact of our programs is through our Community Strengths and Needs Assessment. This survey assesses the prevalence of sexual violence and sexuality among adults with disabilities. Through providing technical assistance, trainings, and assessments locally and nationally, we can share our knowledge and progress in disability justice and violence prevention. Our next slide has an image saying "Stop Sexual Violence" at the top. Inside an octagon shape are the 5 strategies to prevent sexual violence, which include teach skills, provide opportunities, support survivors, promote protective norms, and create protective environments. Today we will be discussing systemic ableism as a method to create protective environments, a powerful sexual violence prevention strategy from the CDC's Stop SV technical package. We will define and explain ableism and some ways we can address it. We will hear a presentation on disability justice, and 3 panelists will share their struggles with systemic ableism and provide suggestions for social and environmental change. Creating protective environments means we are working on uplifting and creating environments that make the desired behavior, equitable relationships, the easy behavior. When we have safe, stable, and nurturing environments, we feel safer and are likely less motivated to use power over as a means to control. A few environmental examples that increase public and personal safety are ramps, accessible transportation, sidewalks, curb cuts, and public policy. Each of these environmental approaches is a method to increase connectedness and social inclusion, protective factors against child maltreatment, youth violence, sexual violence, intimate partner violence, elder abuse, and suicide. When ableism intersects with racism, environments are not safe and there is an even greater loss of power. When ableism intersects with racism, environments are not safe and there is an even greater loss of power. Mia Mingus, a well-known disability justice advocate, reminds us that ableism and abled supremacy fundamentally shape our culture, society, and relationships. You cannot end or fight ableism without also ending and fighting all other forms of oppression and violence. Ableism and racism are intertwined. Both propose one group is superior to other groups and are built on social classifications used to disempower a subset of society. By removing power from people categorized as BIPOC individuals and those with disabilities, it makes every avenue of abuse more tolerable and acceptable. This is why police bias is allowed. There are disproportionate numbers of these groups being incarcerated, abused, and killed at the hands of our justice system. The solution is not just training. It has to be a societal shift in power where BIPOC citizens and those with disabilities are not considered inferior. Disability justice is at the core of fighting ableism and uplifting the disability. Disability justice is at the core of fighting ableism and uplifting the disability community. Our guest presenter, Deanna Yadalahi, is a self-proclaimed fat, disabled, neurodivergent, mad, non-binary, diasporic mixed-race Iranian and Toltec Mexican community activist, organizer, and dog parent with 8 years of disability justice scholar art activism about collaboratively undoing ableism and intersecting oppressions, especially as it relates to collective accessibility. They hope to enact institutional change and radical reimagination that will lead to more supportive and just realities through community building, resource creating, presenting, writing, and via Deanna's creative access consulting practice.
And now Deanna will be Deanna.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Deanna Parvin Yadalahi. My pronouns are they, them. Sorry about that. My dog was barking. Just for a quick access check-in, I am experiencing some ear pain. I use captions. I have my emotional support dog with me. So she might bark from time to time, but I'll mute as soon as I can to try to mitigate any sudden noises that can cause access frictions for others. And yeah, other unmet access needs I will meet independently after I present. Unfortunately, I have to have my camera off today, but I'm so excited to be in community with you all and share about what I'm really passionate about. So this is a short presentation called Disability Justice and Creative Access. First, let's define ableism, which you can learn more about at bit.ly/ableism 2022, which is on the bottom of this slide and is highlighted. Ableism, defined by Talila Lewis, Dustin Gibson, and others. Talila Lewis, or TL, no gender pronouns, developed in community with disabled, Black, and other negatively racialized people, especially Dustin Gibson, a January 2022 updated working definition of ableism, which is the following, defined as, quote, a system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in eugenics, anti-Blackness, misogyny, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. This systemic oppression leads to people and society determining people's values based on their culture, age, language, appearance, religion, birth, or living place, quote unquote health/wellness, and or their ability to satisfactorily produce or reproduce, quote unquote excel, and quote unquote behave. You do not have to be disabled to experience ableism, end quote. Now I'll talk a little bit about disability justice versus disability rights. This is a quote that comes from Sins Invalid's blog post from January 2020 called "What is Disability Justice?" Quote, at its core, the disability rights framework centers people who can achieve status, power, and access through a legal or rights-based framework, which we know is not possible for many disabled people or appropriate for all situations. Bullet. Disability rights focuses exclusively on ableism while ignoring other oppressions like racism, sexism, and classism. Bullet. Disability rights typically focused on the white experience of disability without acknowledging white privilege. Bullet. Disability rights also focused mostly on physical accessibility, but disability justice challenges these norms. Sins Invalid 2020, end quote. Disability justice. This is a quote from, well, there's two quotes. One of them is a continuation of the resource from the last slide, and the second paragraph is a quote from Sins Invalid's book called Skin, Tooth, and Bone, The Basis of Our Movement is Our People, 2019, specifically page 8 through 9 in the plain text version. Disability justice is a movement building framework that was developed in 2005 by Patty Byrne, Leroy Moore, Mia Mingus, Stacy Milburn, Eli Clare, and Sebastian Margaret. Movement building means coming together to advocate for a common cause. Disability justice was created by queer, transgender or gender nonconforming, disabled, Black, Asian, and other people of color. Disability justice addresses inaccessibility and ableism in racial justice and other movements. And actually, that wasn't a direct quote, that was a paraphrasing. The next one is a quote from the aforementioned book by Sins Invalid. Quote, while a concrete and radical move forward toward justice for disabled people, the disability rights movement simultaneously invisibilized the lives of disabled people of color, immigrants with disabilities, disabled people who practice marginalized religions, in particular, those experiencing the violence of anti-Islamic beliefs and actions, queers with disabilities, trans and gender non-conforming people with disabilities, people with disabilities who are houseless, people with disabilities who are incarcerated, people with disabilities who have had their ancestral land stolen, among others. End quote. Next, I'll share the 10 principles of disability justice, which were developed by Sins Invalid. You can learn more about these with beautifully written, more in-depth short descriptions of each principle at tinyurl.com/10DJ principles. It's 10, capital D, capital J, capital P in the word principles. And the number 10 is in numerical form. On the left on this slide, there is a pink image that has the 10 principles written on it. And behind it, it looks like there is veins. And it is supposed to imitate what a heart would look like. The principles are intersectionality, leadership of those most impacted, anti-capitalism, cross-movement organizing, wholeness, sustainability, cross-disability solidarity, interdependence, collective access, and collective liberation. Access is Love by Alice Wong, Mia Mingus, and Sandy Ho is an amazing resource that goes into, as well as campaign, a social media campaign, that goes into depth about how to increase accessibility across intersectionality and identities, not just disability, and starts with a website from disabilityinersectionalitysummit.com/access-is-love/ Hashtag Access is Love, suggested actions, a place to start. From disabilityinersectionalitysummit.com/places-to-start/. 1. Prioritize info about accessibility for all events and workplace. 2. If you come across an event that doesn't have access info listed, contact organizers to include it. 3. Value disabled expertise. 4. Include image descriptions and alt text on your social media posts. 5. Make sure video or audio content you create or use has captions or transcripts. 6, hashtag capitalizing each word in your hashtag helps screen readers. 7, along with names and pronouns, include an access check-in when doing introductions. 8, use content notices for content that may be taxing, harmful, triggering, or traumatizing. 9, encourage your people. Just to repeat, it was number 9 is encourage your people. And number 10, expanding what access means. I will just be sharing the content of number 10, which is expanding what access means. And it is from that same link. Accessibility can also include the following: having a sliding scale for fees, online options for participation, flexible time and pace of activities, venues that are close to public transportation. Just to repeat, venues that are close to public transportation, childcare, sensory room support, sensory support room, gender neutral bathrooms, no flash photography, being mindful of police and security presence, food, multilingual spaces, accessible seating, including for fat bodies, acknowledging Native communities and the land upon which we are on, and finally, respecting different spiritual and religious practices. Another amazing resource about accessibility is The Revolution Must Be Accessible from Heard. In the title of this resource, it is The Revolution Will Be is crossed out, and it says must be accessible. This is a guide for building access-centered online movement education, and there are different versions of the same information in ASL, Spanish, and English. And the links to each resource are listed on the slide, which was provided to you all, and is clickable and is a bit.ly link. So here is the summarized information from the resource. Prepare, prepare, prepare. Plan, coordinate, and budget for access early. Interpreters aren't one size fits all. It is important to find someone who will be able to accurately and clearly interpret. The importance of deaf interpreters. Capital D, deaf interpreters are skilled at explaining concepts that do not have signs or that are abstract or complex. Interpreting teams. Hire 2+ interpreters. Interpreting work is exhaustive and intensive. Interpreters work together to support one another. This is a continuation of the summary. Tech tips. Signers and interpreters need to be seen clearly. Include access team as part of planning. If the problems cannot be fixed, cancel the session until the time when everyone has access. During the webinar, announce, prioritize, visual descriptions, give their names, confirm, be patient, pause, build in breaks. People who are signing on screen should be prioritized in terms of visual space. Captioning. Captions are not a substitute for sign language interpretation. Access is a practice, not a place. It's a work in progress. Follow up with disabled attendees and panelists for feedback and suggestions. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Deanna.
Thank you, Deanna. That was a great presentation showing what disability justice should look like. IDJ recognizes that we fall short in our disability justice work. We do not have ASL or Spanish interpreters. Our webinars are not very ethnically diverse. And we do not acknowledge the Native American ancestors whose land we inhabit. However, we do excel in some areas. We give voice to, and upraise, the disability community through our trainings, organizational assessment, and hub. Visit us at indisabilityjustice.org. We provide closed captioning and transcripts of our webinars. And our leadership is made up of people with various disabilities and gender orientations. We are taking positive steps forward. We were able to provide Spanish interpreters for one webinar this year and are applying for grants to provide ASL and Spanish interpreters for the coming year. Finally, we are working with an organization to become more ethnically diverse. As Deanna so brilliantly discussed, disability justice is a framework for modeling and producing social change in a balance of power. One way disability justice can restore power to the disability community is to combat ableism. Today we will hear from 3 panelists who experience systemic ableism. This includes the physical barriers, policies, laws, regulations, and practices that exclude people with disabilities from full participation and equal opportunity. One example is when insurance companies are allowed to deny coverage based on disability. Or consider the person wanting to work, but also afraid of losing their health benefits. In many state and federal programs that assist people with disabilities, if said person earns money above an arbitrary cap, the person is no longer eligible for those programs and loses their benefits. These include income assistance and health coverage, which pays for home health aids and equipment. These may be too expensive for that person to pay even with the income from a job, but are not covered by the new employer. Our 3 panelists have been asked to share their stories with you. First up is Alice. Alice, what do you have for us?
Hello. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Great. So I'm so happy to be here. My name is Alice, and I use she, her pronouns. I'd also like to briefly mention my disability access needs. I'm going to be reading from my notes and referring to them, so I cannot look at the chat. So if there's anything important, like if there's a problem with my sound where people can't hear me, just say it aloud and I'll hear. The other thing is more broadly, during the Q&A, I have trouble following the chat while listening carefully, and I do want to listen carefully. So if there's anything important for me, please read it aloud. Great. So my profile picture is an illustration with the words, quote, disability justice, end quote, artistically written over part of a forest with different sized trees in a deep purple starry night. Yasmin Amar Atta illustrated it. I'm speaking from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ohlone people. I'm a multiply disabled, neurodivergent, queer Jewish woman. I'm also privileged in some substantial ways, including having educational privilege, as well as some other important aspects of class privilege and white privilege. I'll give a little info about some of my work history and activism. I'm a lawyer who has chosen to be on inactive status, at least for the time being, since I've chosen not to practice law now. I worked as a legal editor and legal research analyst for years, and I'm starting an editorial and research services business that doesn't focus on law and does focus on social justice. In my work as a legal editor and legal research analyst, I focused on anti-discrimination law in employment and housing that included the rights of people to receive reasonable accommodations for their disabilities in these areas. As Deanna mentioned, legal disability rights protections are inaccessible to many and often very inadequate. They're often very limited. I realized this through my reading about disability justice, my conversation with other disabled people, reading court cases, and my own lived experience. I've done social justice activism for most of my adult life, and some of it has involved disability justice. I was focusing on climate justice activism for years, but since the pandemic began, I've been mainly doing activism and educational work for COVID safety and COVID equity, both individually and a disability advocacy group that's run by disabled people. I aim to do this work informed by disability justice. My understanding of systemic ableism and how it interferes with my ability to fully participate in public and private life is informed by disability justice. Rebecca Twinley explains, in addition to personal ableism, quote, there is systemic ableism, which refers to the inequity disabled people experience as a result of numerous barriers, attitudinal, communicative, physical, and those created or upheld through policy. That's in, quote, actually autistic at 40, a source of my auto/biographical troubles, end quote, that's published in auto/biography review. In my talk, I'm going to focus on those barriers that I experience. And I experience those access barriers daily, which is extremely hard for me. I especially face systemic ableism because I can't risk long COVID. Not only do I have disabilities that likely put me at higher risk of severe illness from COVID, but I have disabilities that would likely make my getting long COVID, which we're all at risk of, to be even more difficult for me than it is for people who aren't initially disabled. There are a huge number of people who are at like me, maybe at higher risk of severe illness from COVID, or who clearly are at severe risk of at higher risk of severe illness from COVID. So many people who live with people like us, and so many people who, for whatever reason, many having to do with systemic inequity, can't risk getting COVID. Even if I wasn't disabled, I'd still take strong COVID safety precautions to not risk long COVID and not risk spreading COVID. For example, I especially don't want to risk spreading COVID to the beloved person I share a home with who has a weak immune system, and I really don't want to risk spreading it to anyone. But because this panel is about our personal experiences with systemic ableism, I'll just focus on the systemic ableism and how it negatively impacts me. Here's a type of systemic ableism that harms me: the lifting of mask mandates, because mask mandates can make spaces reasonably safe COVID-wise for people at high risk of severe illness from COVID and everyone who can't risk COVID or doesn't want to risk getting or spreading it. Because mask mandates have been lifted and few public buildings and events require effective masks and other needed COVID safety measures, I'm shut out of most of public life. Being unnecessarily shut out of public life is extremely painful for me. In the before times, that time before the pandemic, I would regularly go out dancing, as well as to cultural and political events and parties. Most places and events that I would like to go to and I used to go to are now inaccessible to me. I'm also lucky that I can work and study from home and get everything I need through delivery or curbside pickup. If I had to go to mask optional places to work, study, buy groceries, or buy my medicines, like many do, I'd be risking COVID every time I did so, which would feel horrible. And because of the ways that I mentioned I'm privileged, makes me, protects me in many ways for those COVID risks for so many people, essential workers especially, who have to risk COVID when they work at their jobs. I'd be at risk because studies show that one-way masking, even with an N95 you think fits you well, doesn't sufficiently protect you from COVID when you're near unmasked people. For more info, see the February 15th, 2022 Slate article titled, quote, "Why One-Way Masking Isn't a Very Good Public Health Solution," end quote. And there's even more hypertransmissible subvariants that have come out since that article was written. People mistakenly think that they no longer need to wear masks or require them at their gatherings because public health departments no longer have public mask mandates in public spaces. I've been invited to dance parties where the masks weren't required, where the host mistakenly thought it was sufficiently safe because they were asking for recent antigen tests, or the host mistakenly thought it was reasonably safe because it was outside, or sometimes they didn't care if it was reasonably safe or just didn't think about it, and it was completely, it was a huge COVID danger and completely inaccessible. Just as a background, public health departments don't generally give accurate info about how a concerning percentage of people are infectious with COVID when testing negative on antigen tests. Antigen tests can be useful as one protective measure, but by themselves, they're not sufficient. And public health departments don't generally report that many public health experts warn that the Omicron variant can spread outdoors, when, especially in crowded places, even though outdoors is much safer than indoors, all things being equal. I'm grateful that two partner dances that I love going to, which are each more than 8 miles away, still require well-fitting, high filtration masks from a reputable supplier and have other good COVID safety protections like great ventilation. But with masks no longer required on public transit, I'm reliant on getting a ride to the dance and back to my home from someone who is willing to wear a good mask in the car. Because I can't always get rides from people I trust, and I don't drive because of disability-related reasons. I sometimes end up traveling with people I don't know well, and sometimes I'm concerned about my safety. Also, without masks required in public transit, I have to rely on getting a ride with a person who is willing to wear a good mask to travel to many important places, like my COVID-safe dentist who lives many miles away. Another form of systemic ableism is the ending of virtual events that were broadly accessible to people with a wide variety of disabilities. Even if an event itself is reasonably COVID safe, I can't always get there in a reasonably COVID safe way because I can't drive for disability related reasons, as I mentioned, and as I mentioned, public transit in my area, and I think practically every area no longer requires masks. Systemic ableism leads me to spend much time having to fight it if I want access, both fighting collectively and individually. While I value the connections I've made with other activists, including disabled activists, our COVID safety activism is often very time-consuming, taking time away from growing my new business and other things that are important to me. Though I'm proud of our successes, like our public testimony campaign to get masks required during surges in our local subway system, which unfortunately has expired. I find it discouraging when we don't win needed COVID safety measures like that expiration, which we fought to get it continued and lost, even though levels are still high and we still need those mask protections for our safety and access. The systemic ableism I face leads me to feel anger and sadness every day. And if I didn't have white privilege, I would experience even more systemic ableism combined with systemic racism. Also, if I didn't have educational privilege and other aspects of class privilege, I would experience even more systemic ableism combined with other forms of systemic oppression. Systemic ableism means that there are only a small percentage of people who I have a shared reality with regarding disability justice and COVID safety. For this presentation, I was asked to address what changes I'd like to see and what can be done to implement changes. Broadly, I'd like to see all organizations have disability justice trainings and adopt a disability justice framework. I'd like all organizations to include the funds that are needed for accessibility in their grant applications and explain why these are so important. Regarding my specific access needs around COVID safety and the access needs for the many other people who can't risk COVID, I'd like to see all organizations incorporate strong COVID safety measures, such as mask requirements at their events, as part of a broad commitment to accessibility and disability justice. And I'd like disability advocacy and social justice organizations to incorporate COVID safety and COVID equity priorities into their advocacy priorities and activism for organizations who do activism. To learn more about COVID safety and creating environments that are accessible to people who can't risk COVID, see the People's CDC and the Jewish COVID Resilience Network for some important COVID equity analysis. Please read Stephen W. Thrasher's book. That's THRASHER, quote, "The Viral Underclass, the Human Toll When Inequity and Disease Collide." Also, if you go to the website for Mandate Masks US, you'll find a link to, quote, "a list of organizations working on mask advocacy and COVID prevention efforts and long COVID advocacy in the US and Canada online," end quote. Please consider getting involved in this important work to greatly increase access to me and the many, many other disabled people who need COVID safety for our access while supporting everyone's health and safety. To learn more about systemic ableism from a lack of COVID safety and COVID equity measures, see, quote, "Able-bodied leftists cannot abandon disabled solidarity to," quote unquote, "move on from COVID," by Leah Lakshmi Piepsna Samarsinha, and the article, "Disabled People Are Tired, Public Health and Ableism," by Christine Mittchell, end quote, "You are not entitled to our deaths. COVID, Abled Supremacy, and Interdependence," by Mia Mingus. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. What I am hearing is that lax restrictions of federal, state, and local COVID mandates have left you physically isolated. This has affected where you feel safe when you are out in public. In essence, taking away your power to freely immerse yourself in society. Again, thank you. Next up, we will hear from Violet.
Hi, Violet. Your mic is muted.
Hi, Jen. Before I start, I would, with your permission, like to acknowledge the Native American tribes of Indiana.
Yeah,
Indiana was the historic homeland of many Native American tribes, including the Shawnee, Miami, Wea, Potawatomi, Delaware, Wyandotte, Kickapoo, Piankashaw, Chickasha, and many others. They were removed forcibly from their land, but still maintain a strong presence in the state of Indiana. Hello, I am Violet Nova. I am from St. Louis, Missouri, from the Midwest, the land of the Cahokia Mounds and of baseball and pretty poor tasting beer. I moved to Portland because of accessibility issues to healthcare. I am trans. My pronouns are she, her. I'm neurodiverse. I am also mentally disabled and have some physical disabilities as well. I will recognize the Portland metro area tribes of Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, and bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Malala, and many other tribes who made their homes here. Today I am going to speak on my experience growing up with systemic ableism in the 80s and 90s. And how that has affected me to this day and how it continues to affect children in the educational system. I was born, as I said, I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and I was put through the private educational system through Lutheran grade school and high school, and eventually public high school to finish out. And all three that I just named in the state of Missouri had bare bones supports for neurodiverse individuals, and or as they were called back in those days, developmentally disabled. And in those days, if if a child was rambunctious, the pediatrician just put them on Ritalin and called it a day. Sometimes the schools would mandate these children be on Ritalin. I was one such child. I went on Ritalin at the tender age of 4. And initially that medicine, fried my brain daily, and I was, completely out of it most of the time. Then my troubles with homework began in about, I would say, 4th grade, and I started to be bullied by the educators who just thought I was not towing the line. And it was this intolerance that I encountered almost on a daily basis, and would basically compel me to try to avoid going to school no matter what, because doing homework was like a painful thing for me to do on a sensory level. And nowadays, disability justice recommends that in cases where homework proves an impediment to learning, a child should be exempted from being forced to do homework, because it is antithetical to their learning style. However, this precept of disability justice is not observed by most school systems, least of all the private parochial school system. And it is for this reason I speak out. And some of what I say from here on is going to be a little bit personal, a little bit raw, and a little content warning level because of abuse on an institutional level. But basically, my teachers would give me detention and send me to the principal's office for not doing my homework. And the principal would sit there and yell at me and tell me how worthless I was and how I was never going to amount to anything. And I don't know about you, but even to this day, I find that absolutely unacceptable, that kind of behavior and language towards a child who doesn't know what's going on. Because while I was long diagnosed with ADD and then ADHD, when I was a child, the DSM-4 was prohibitive of comorbidity between attention deficit disorders and autism because of a crossover in symptomology. So my autism went undiagnosed. And it was a struggle to get me into special education, which, as I mentioned before, was extremely bare bones, but also was, kind of instrumental in getting me through and to finishing school. I know not much about the special education system these days, but trust me when I say, basically, they just sat there and watched you do homework. They just sat there and made sure you did your work. In the 1990s and early 2000s, that's all they did. And getting out of school was one of the most relieving things for me at the time, and school should be a place of joy and learning and fun and fundamental levels of personal development. Not abject terror and relentless survival mode leading to a lifetime of trauma and being susceptible to intimate partner violence, as I was unfortunately a victim of intimate partner violence in 2018 and was made homeless and jobless because of how traumatized I was from those experiences. And for the longest time after high school, I was so burnt out on school and learning and education that I just didn't go to college. And that's what abuse in and ableism in the educational system for K to 12 does. It basically precludes disabled people by coercion from further education, from making their way in a reasonable manner in this capitalist dystopia. So they are forced to either flip burgers for a living and take that abuse, work in retail and take that abuse, or be on disability and be considered a moocher by a group of people who couldn't care less about them and would rather them be dead. The only way that I could ever see, true disability justice being, meted out is by the abolition of capitalism. However, in lieu of that, we need to stop the abuse in the educational system and provide more robust educational assistance for people who are in need of it. And stop, for the love of all that is holy, gatekeeping a lot of these diagnoses that would provide access to these resources. This is, I believe, the most base fundamental thing that I can think of that would make things better for everyone, and that so that cases like me would never happen again. That's about all I had in mind to speak about, but like ableism that I experienced in the educational system also extended into the workplace. I experienced workplace bullying with managers, and I worked as a student leader for PCC for a year before the pandemic, and even my manager there was ableist. So, no institution, no matter how progressive or forward thinking it is not prone to ableism. We must always be vigilant. Thank you.
Next up, we will hear from Violet. Thank you, Violet. It seems as though our healthcare and school systems have a ways to go to rid their institutional and systemic ableism. They cause people to be isolated and feel insignificant. This makes asking for accommodations seem daunting. Thank you again. Last but certainly not least is Luna. Thank you, Luna.
Hey, Luna. Hey, Luna.
Hi, I'm here. Sorry. Okay, well, my name is Luna Eversong. I have cerebral palsy. I'm also neurodivergent. I'm a mother of 2 boys. I'm a survivor of intimate partner violence and abuse and rape. I've been disabled my entire life, so I have a very in-depth experience with both systemic ableism that has affected me both publicly and privately. I do public speaking to try to educate both organizations and individuals on how the disabled community is impacted by violence and ableism on a daily basis. I actually have a website, and if anybody wants to learn more about what I speak about, Sierra can put that down in the chat if she would like. Oh, did we skip Lee?
No.
Are you sure?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
did. You did.
I think we did.
Yeah,
No.
because I was supposed to speak after Alex.
I think we got the order backwards.
No, it's Luna.
Okay, and then Lee goes after me.
Lee, stop speaking.
Okay, all right.
Am I speaking or not after Luna?
No.
Okay. Like I was saying, I have a website for my public speaking where I speak more about these issues. I think the thing that I want to speak about the most on how systemic ableism has impacted me is probably like my most recent experience. I got married about 2.5 years ago. I'm currently going through a divorce right now because once again, I've been the victim of intimate partner violence, and my husband committed a violent act on me in front of my children, and I had to leave and get domestic violence services. It's not my first time with this experience, but it's my first time being married and having this experience. And I may want to issue like a trigger warning because I don't know if what I'm going to be talking about will be triggering or harmful for some people to hear. So if this topic is unsettling to you, I just want to give you a heads up. But I got married 2.5 years ago, and a lot of people don't know this, but when a disabled person gets married, especially if they marry an able-bodied person like I did, and I've been disabled since birth, so it's a little bit different for me. But when you marry an able-bodied person that is working like I did, they count your spouse's income against yours, and the threshold in order to be able to keep your SSI benefits is very, very low. So when I got married, the amount that my husband was making caused me to lose my benefits. I wasn't okay with this, but I knew it was going to happen. And initially, my husband and I had a plan to do things like share financial information, get a joint bank account, so that I would never have to like ask for money or feel the burden of no longer having my own finances and my own access to money. However, throughout the course of our marriage, that did not happen. I was abused financially. I was abused emotionally. I was abused socially at times. I was abused through my need for transportation because I do not drive, at least not at the moment. I'm working on changing that, but at the moment I don't drive. And then ultimately, by the end of it, I ended up being abused physically. And it was the physical abuse that ultimately made me decide to leave. But I went through a pretty bad bout of intimate partner violence this last time. And I definitely think that had it not been for this systemic ableism that impacted my marriage, my abuse wouldn't be affecting me so badly right now. When I got out of my marriage, I had no money, no access to money. I didn't have my Social Security back yet. I do now, but it took some time. Not as much time as I was anticipating, but still took some time. I had to borrow money from friends, from family, and it was just really unsettling because I didn't know what was going to happen to me and my children. And obviously, because my husband is abusive, he offered no accountability for what he ultimately did and no assistance to hold us over for the meantime. But not having marriage equality and not having certain rights within a marriage because you're disabled definitely sets you up for really severe cases of intimate partner violence. I'm not saying that every disabled person that gets married is going to be abused, but it increases the likelihood that you will be abused. And I've personally experienced that. And like not having access to my own money and finances is a big reason why the marriage was 2.5 years before I left. At one point I was pregnant and, no money, none of that, no resources. I was living in a different town My support system was limited. Like the thought of leaving was really scary for obvious reasons. I was terrified of experiencing homelessness again because I had already gone through that experience in my younger years because of intimate partner violence. And I didn't want to go through that again. So I put up with a lot of things I shouldn't have. And unfortunately, it took a very extreme situation for me to finally leave, because at that point he had threatened my life and the life of my children. But because of the restraints that systemic ableism put on my marriage, I was not able to leave when I honestly should have left. And that's definitely something that I want to educate the public about, because it's definitely something that needs to change. You shouldn't lose access to your independence, your income, your medical and social services just because you get married. It's a recipe for disaster. And I'm lucky that I got out of my situation with my life. And I know I'm not the only disabled person that has had this experience. And unfortunately, there are a lot of disabled people that have found themselves in situations like mine that did not survive. They didn't get out with their lives. They were killed. Because caregiver violence is also a really high risk in the disabled community. It's actually quite frequent that disabled people are murdered by either intimate partners or caregivers, people they know. And there's a lot of factors that play into that, but systemic ableism goes so deep that I think it seems as though able-bodied people, both within our society and within our government, views us as less than and almost subhuman because of our inability to perform certain jobs, our inability to significantly financially contribute to the economy, our inability to access education in the same way that somebody who isn't disabled might, our inability to interact socially in the same way that someone who isn't disabled might. The impacts that systemic ableism has on marriage is just one of the many ways that it has impacted me on a daily basis. I have experienced systemic ableism through being a parent. I have experienced systemic ableism through education, through trying to meet medical needs, trying to have access to transportation, trying to have access to domestic violence services. There are a lot of services, well, not a lot, but there are several services that I personally have tried to access and was not able to, either because I was too disabled, not disabled enough, or they didn't service my area. Unfortunately, I live in an area that is very resource poor, and that only compounds my experience on how systemic ableism has impacted me. People don't realize this, but a lot of services available to people with disabilities are region-based. They're not necessarily on a national level. And if you live in a resource poor region and you're like me and don't have access to transportation, or you're on a limited income, so it's not as easy for you to just move away, you're pretty much out of luck. And if you don't have friends or family members available to help you, you struggle a lot more than you should. And that resource poverty is a big reason why I've been through homelessness, why I stayed in violent situations for years sometimes, why it would take, like another time when I was escaping domestic violence, the first time, before this, back in 2017, 2018. It took me a year to finally get enough services to be able to get out of that situation, because this area was so resource poor, and I had never sought resources before, so I didn't know where to start. And the people in my life trying to assist me did not know how to assist me, or they just weren't listening or comparing my ability to escape a situation to their able-bodied ability to escape a situation. I think systemic ableism is so prevalent and so heavy on a daily basis that for me personally, it has contributed to why I've been raped, why I've been abused, why I've been almost killed more than once, why I have trouble getting some services for my children. It runs pretty deep for me, and I feel that on a daily basis. And Violet was talking about how, you know, when you can't work and you're on benefits, then you get accused of being a moocher, or if for some reason you cannot complete college because the disability access isn't there, or for whatever reason, people look down on you and see you as subhuman. I mean, whether you're actively going through a situation like what I am right now, or you're just simply living your day-to-day life, I think the systemic ableism within our society, especially in this country, is so deep. It's felt every day. And I know for a fact I'm not the only disabled person that can agree to having that experience. Some things that I think could be implemented is, I think education is a really big way that we can combat systemic ableism, because a lot of ignorance can do a lot of damage. And I have experienced a lot of ignorance in my life. Like, people will take one look at me and see that I can't walk. And I remember growing up, a lot of the times, because I couldn't walk, they would assume that I also had low functioning cognitive abilities. I do not. And speaking to me for 5 minutes, you can see that I'm very articulate. But they would have this idea about me already in their mind that no matter what I said, they already made up their minds and already decided that I was unintelligent or subhuman. And a lot of that's just a lack of education on how diverse disabilities are and what they can look like, and how people live with them. So I think education is a really great way to start. I think we need to get into our town halls, our Congress meetings. We need to get access to those. I think our government needs to hear from disabled voices, even those that may not be able to speak the way that I can, still have something valuable to say, whether they need assistance doing that from an interpreter or someone that can articulate their words for them. But I think our government needs to hear directly from us within the community how systemic ableism impacts us on a daily basis. And they need to hear different ideas from everyone on what we can do to stop that, because it's definitely not a one solution fix the problem type of situation, because there are so many different ways in which we are impacted, but the impact is definitely felt on a daily basis for a lot of us. I don't think anybody should be considered subhuman, less than, less superior, just because of the color of their skin, the abilities that they do or don't have, where they're from, what they believe in. Like, we need to get to a place where all people are respected, not for what makes us alike, but for what makes us different. But I think education and speaking to law officials, letting them actually hear disabled voices is a really good start towards moving towards systemic change for everybody that is impacted by it. Let me just make sure I covered everything. Like I said, I've been impacted systemically in a lot of ways by ableism, and I've experienced it in my personal life too. But those things that I've mentioned are probably the biggest things that I wanted to talk about, and them being the freshest definitely gave me a lot to say. But if anyone has any questions for me, just let me know.
Thank you, Luna. Marriage with a disability can be frustrating. It leaves the person with a disability at a disadvantage in all areas of life, such as financial insecurity and physical safety. This can lead to feelings of inadequacy and of being powerless and fearing for your life. Thank you, Luna. Now we will turn to audience questions for our panelists. Place them in the chat or speak up. A common theme is power leaves one believing they do not deserve a safe and healthy environment and skeptical of reaching out for help. We must fight systemic ableism and return the power back to people with disabilities so we can live free from harm.
So if you have questions for anybody, let us know.
This is Lee. I'm confused. I thought I was one of the 4 panelists that was speaking today, and nobody told me in advance if I was not speaking. I'm confused.
We talked about this earlier. So do we have any questions from the panelists? Any questions at all?
I have a question. I apologize. My chat feature is not working at all, so I can't read anything and I can't type anything. Also, I have my daughter here, so if there's a periodic shout, I apologize for that. If someone is interested in becoming more active with disability justice, disability advocacy, where do we start?
I think I might be able to answer this one if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
If you're coming from like I don't know if you're disabled or able-bodied, but if you're coming from like an able-bodied outside of the disabled community perspective, my thing is like doing research is, to me, is the first step, but also that research includes not just reading articles and blogs about our issues, but also speaking out disabled voices so that you can hear for yourself how you can be an ally. Because that is the biggest way, in my opinion, that able-bodied people can advocate for us, by being strong allies. Because one thing that I've noticed through trying to advocate, my voice gets shut down a lot by people that don't have disabilities. I don't know if what I'm saying feels like a personal attack or what it is, but it gets shut down, or I get told that the issue is not as broad as I think it is, or not as big of an issue as I think it is. And I think, and I've seen that happen too within the people of color community. Their voices get shut down by people with white privilege. So that happens to us a lot. So like the biggest way that people outside of our community can get into advocacy is by speaking with us and educating themselves on how they can become strong allies, because sometimes we need those allies not to really speak on our behalf, but speak with us, because it can be really hard for people that already see us as subhuman to want to take the time to listen to our voices alone. But if we have strong allies backing us up, I think that can be a really big help.
I agree with that, and I'd just like to build on that a little bit. One principle of disability justice, which I think is really important, which Luna alluded to, is the importance of leadership of the most impacted. And I don't know, Jeffrey, how you're positioned if you have a disability, what ways you
I do.
have. You do, great, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so let me just quickly read a little bit from Skin, Tooth, and Bone, Invasive Movement People, which I think is a really important book that I'd recommend reading if you haven't read it already.
Yeah, I jotted it down.
Wonderful, yeah, that Deanna had read parts of. It says, when we talk about ableism, racism, sexism, and transmisogyny, colonialization, police violence, etc., we're not looking to academics and what experts tell us what's what. We're lifting up, listening to, reading, following, and highlighting the perspectives of those who are most impacted by the systems we fight against. By centering the leadership of the most impacted, we keep ourselves grounded in real world problems and find creative strategies for resistance. So that's, I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind when doing activism. Also, you can seek out disability justice training, since Invalid offers them to groups. There's many others. It sounds like Deanna had, I'm not familiar with Deanna's services, but that sounds like a good thing to look into as well. And then when you're reflecting on our talks, learning from our lived experiences and analysis. One thing that's actually important, which I forgot to mention, is I just actually mentioned one way that I experience systemic ableism. Actually, there are many ways. Neurodivergence, around my neurodivergence is one. It's just the COVID safety is more pressing, and a great book to learn more about that, as well as COVID safety, is Leah Lakshmi Piepsna Summer Sinha's The Future is Disabled, Prophecies, Love Notes, and Morning Songs. So those are some other resources that I would recommend, as well as ones from other disability justice writers like Patricia Byrne, Leroy Moore, Mia Mingus, and the other resources that I recommended in my talk.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Sierra, we have you contact us slide that we need to share. Um,
Can you see the slides?
Yeah,
Slide? Okay.
hang on.
This slide shows 2 of our participants who would like to share their contact information. The first is Luna Eversong. Her picture shows her standing with her pink walker in a green lawn with out of focus trees in the background. She is smiling and wearing a black dress. Her hair is over her shoulders and brown with 3 to 4 inch bright purple tips. Her website is https://thedifferentlyabledadvocate.org. Her emails are luna@thedifferentlyabledadvocate.org or Luna Eversong@gmail.com. Next is Deanna Yadalahi. Her picture is a photograph of a young adult named Deanna Yadalahi. Deanna is outdoors in front of trees, plants, an orange flower, and blue sky, and is smiling. Deanna has light brown skin and short, partially shaved, curly hair with side bangs. Deanna is wearing a light pink tie-dye top and a colorful floral kimono. Racial and Disability Justice Consultant, Leaping Water Consulting. http://leapingwater.org/Deanna Yadalahi/. Racial and Disability Justice Product Copywriter and Facilitator, the Carrie Gray Group and National Alliance of Melanin Advocates. http://withcarrie.com/. My website, bit.ly/dy scholarship. Our last slide is a contact us slide. It has our website banner. It has our website banner. Our logo is on the left with orange waves on a light purple background with Indiana Disability Justice written in dark purple above the waves. All in a dark purple frame. To the right is Disability Justice and Violence Prevention Resource Hub. Our website, https://indisabilityjustice.org and email, indisabilityjustice@gmail.com. Thank you for attending.